Welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon on supporting math learning through competencies, standards, and assessments for grades 3 through 5. These are your presenters today. We have Annie Wallace. She is from the New Hampshire DOE, and we have Heather Jenkins, who is from Demonstrated Success. And then my name's Tammy Hilton. I'm your facilitator, and I'm also with Demonstrated Success. We want to thank the New Hampshire DOE for sponsoring this webinar today. This is the second in a series of webinars to help you support math learning. Everyone is going to be muted throughout the webinar, but we do encourage you to ask questions. If you want to put them in the Q&A section on your Zoom screen, we will be checking those and responding to those throughout the webinar today. If you have information that you want everyone to see, then do please feel free to put it into the chat. And then we will be sending an email tomorrow with a link to your PD certificate, the video of this webinar, the PowerPoint, and any other documents that Heather or Annie may mention. And so with that, I am going to hand it off to Heather, who's going to start this webinar for us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hello, everyone. I do see that somebody has put in the Q&A that they are not able to hear anything. I have a feeling that it has to do with their particular computer and the sound on their computer. But if for some reason you all, nobody can probably hear me, but I guess it would be if you, I'm going to just, maybe Tammy or somebody, if you can type in the chat to make sure that folks can hear, or if you could respond to the woman who isn't able to hear. I just want to make sure that everybody's all set.
Sure, I can do that, Heather.
Thank you to those folks who told me that they can hear. I appreciate it. All right, I'm Heather Jenkins. I just wanted to put my face on here. I'm going to actually let Annie Wallace say hello so you can see her face as well.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it greatly.
All right. I am going to turn off my camera so that it's not distracting to me as I go through the slides. So here we go. As you can see on your screen here, I like to have little reminders for everybody as we are going through and really looking at today how we can improve our teaching and make all students learn the way that in the best ways possible. So we're going to look today specifically at competencies and performance tasks and all sorts of standards information. This is the agenda for the day, or for this hour, I guess. And first, we're going to look at the standards, competencies, and assessments. Then we're going to look at aligning those standards with competencies, then assessing competencies with performance tasks. And then we're going to wrap up and do any other additional question and answer. Just to start off, the building blocks for any competencies that are created are the Common Core. Specifically for this webinar, we're talking about math. So their Math Common Core initiative. And just to make sure everybody's on the same page with how you read the Common Core documents. So this is the math standards that we have here. These just happen to be grade 4 examples. So first we start off with the domains of math, or what we call reporting categories. So these show two different domains of math. One's numbers and operations base 10, and the other one is numbers and operations fractions. Underneath those particular areas, if we're looking at math, there are clusters of standards. So our clusters of standards for numbers and operations base 10 for 4th grade is, you can see, generalized place value understanding for multi-digit whole numbers, and then use place value understanding and properties of operations to perform multi-digit arithmetic. Underneath those clusters are your actual standards that apply to that cluster. So it's kind of like a little grouping of standards for your clusters. So each one of those standards is separate. It has a specific number and And those are what the associated standards are when we are looking at creating competencies. For K-8, the math standards for the Common Core, they're internationally benchmarked. They are going to help us provide guidance and rigor and building conceptual understanding and procedural skills and fluency for application of key concepts at each grade level. And they are developmental progressions, right? Learning trajectories that go specifically K-8. So it's very specific for what each grade level is responsible for. And this last bullet here is really important because when we look at math concepts, they tend to occur over a 3-year period. The only one really that comes to mind that isn't is that counting and cardinality that is a kindergarten skill does not necessarily progress through grades 1 and 2. But in general, you have a key concept that is introduced 1 year, and then the next year it's worked on, and then the 3rd year it's actually secured. So that's the way that the math standards tend to progress. And then we're looking at the key math concepts for each grade level, just focusing here really for the grades 3 through 5, right? Concepts, skills, and problem solving related to multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions. That is your key math concept for grades 3 through 5. When we look at math progressions and we look at what our major standards are, we tend to look, because we're looking at the Common Core, there is the Achieve the Core website. This website was designed, and these documents were designed by people who are very well versed in the Common Core. And they have created progressions for each grade level that show what the major supporting and additional clusters of standards are for each grade level. This example here is grade 4. So you can see anything that is in the green square is going to be your major cluster, your key information that you need to make sure that students are getting for your particular grade level. Then in addition to that, you also have what are called supporting clusters and additional clusters. So I guess for understanding and for teaching math, it needs to be understood that not all standards are necessarily created equal, right? When we're looking at all the standards for our grade level, if you have to focus and aren't able to really get into the rigor of each one, then you want to make sure you're really focusing on those major clusters of standards. The second page of all of the Achieve the Core documents for every grade level is this progression that goes K-8. So you can see where each standard is in line with the grade levels on either side of them and all the way up to 8th grade. I should note here, it is an algebra progression. A lot of studies have been done, and there's other progressions out there that might be a geometry progression. For the Common Core, our end game, anybody who's an 8th grade teacher or middle school teacher knows that the end game sort of for them is getting kids ready for high school algebra. So this progression makes sense in regards to that.
Pulling off of what Heather has said, competencies and their aligned standards allow us as teachers to fine-tune our planning and guiding our lessons to address our students' needs. And they also guide us in what will our students learn and how will that learning be addressed. And in the old traditional practice, way back when I was a student in the classroom, it was basically the teacher selected the topic from the curriculum, designed the instructions, and then designed the assessment based on what they had done in class. With a standards-based or competency-based practice, however, we're going to start at the end game. What is it our students need to know and do? How will we assess that? And then we plan the learning opportunities that allow the students to learn what will get them there. And then we use the data from the assessment and from what we're observing and noticing in class as to what we need to rescaffold in or reteach before we move on to the next level. Using standards, competencies, and rubrics to assess. One of the best examples ever given to me about a competency was on the cooking shows and what the end result was. And you're assessed on what the end result is, and knowing what you need to get to, then you had to learn those skills and understandings to get there. So what are academic competencies? They're broad stated goals and success criteria that are measurable, rigorous, and transferable. So competencies empower student learning beyond a single lesson, unit, or course. You plan with the end in mind. You want them to be able to apply that knowledge as they move forward in their learnings. And we want to facilitate, they help to facilitate student-centered learning. And competencies can be interwoven within the curriculum and learning progressions. And it's where you can also look at the creation of new knowledge along with the development of the important skills and dispositions. Dispositions being things that what we think about are 21st century skills, such as perseverance, working with others. So what are academic competencies? It's the interweaving of knowledge, skills, and depositions. Competencies are the broad statements. They describe how students apply and transfer their learnings to new contexts and situations, and they can encompass multiple standards, which are assessed multiple times as you're working towards the competencies. And we generally use rubrics to assess the quality of the student learning in meeting or not meeting the competency. And the framework or the skeleton are the standards. They describe what the student should know and be able to do in relationship to the criteria. And they're distinct statements that provide the building blocks. And we can use checklists to see, has a student met this? Is the student still working on this? And that helps assure us when they're ready to take the competency or show that they've met the competency. A checklist is just a set of criteria, skills, or tasks to accomplish. It's not a means of assessing acquired knowledge. It's just, do they have it or don't they? Whereas the rubric provides explanations of what constitutes excellence and assesses the acquired knowledge and skills. And it's used to explain exactly what one needs to achieve in terms of content and performance. Both are useful tools that can guide students in their learning and teachers in their planning.
So right here on this page, we have a checklist example. I'm going to give a little shout out to Annie. She has created, this is an example of a 4th grade competency that she has created. So what you have on the left-hand side is that competency. And then on the right-hand side are each standard that meets that particular competency. So we put the link right in here for the New Hampshire Department of Education. Annie will talk a little bit about this in a little bit, but this is an example of a checklist that we have here. So this particular checklist allows us to see all those related understandings and skills that either have been accomplished or need to be accomplished or need to be worked on before that competency is able to really be assessed. It also allows us to see when a student may be ready to show that they've met a competency through a performance task or other summative assessment of a competency. So once I know that I've had all of those skills and the student has those skills, then I am able to assess. This particular type of checklist is a classroom observation checklist. You can see along the left-hand side are all the names of a student, of students in a specific classroom. And then the blue is what you're actually looking at or what you're observing. And so it may have different tasks or different processes or practices on a particular observation checklist. This one has mental computation adding 2-digit numbers. And then you can see that there is not yet there, on target, above and beyond, and then any comments. So this is, I really feel like comments are important as well. Sometimes we're just checking to see if students have it, but a lot of times the comments are the things, at least for me, as a teacher, really sort of helped gauge where they were with that understanding. And then obviously the dates and when you're looking at that particular or doing those particular observations are super important. This is a task specific rubric. So as we're looking at this, we're looking at a 4-point rubric. You can see that 2 of those, the number 1 and number 2, the students are not yet there, right? We know that they're not meeting that particular skill level to be able to really assess and be able to do a particular performance task. But then you also have on the left-hand side that 3 and 4, those are students that do have it. And the important thing to look at here is that the one that's the number 3 here, that's sufficient, right? Substantial accomplishment. That 4 is sort of above and beyond full accomplishment and execution. So just looking at what it means to say students have these particular skills, and then we go through and we are able to assess those particular skills. And this is one of the ways to do that. Another rubric example here we have, this is from Engage New York. This is a grade 4 rubric. This is a teacher rubric, right? So what this is doing is it's making the learning goals and evaluation explicit for both teachers and learners. But I do want to say this is a teacher directed rubric. So depending on your students and depending on your grade level, you may want to recreate this with more student-centered language so that students can understand the rubric. I know in grades 3 through 5, you're getting there with students being able to really understand what's being asked of them, but a lot of times there's a separate rubric for a teacher than there is for students. So this is where we talk about with students really understanding what their part in understanding and learning is, right? So we have learning targets that we create. A lot of us post them on our board. And that's great. That's a great first step so that students at least understand what they're supposed to be learning and what the target is. But a lot of times, rubrics and this type of information allows students to see what they need to be able to do to show mastery. And so there's just that other, deeper level of understanding of where students need to be. Rubrics, what we hope for at least is for them to assess assignments consistently. So we want to make sure that they are really specific and that there's no sort of wiggle room for, well, it could be this or that. It's really, a rigorous rubric. And then they also help you provide timely and effective feedback to promote student learning, right? The more feedback we give students, the more that they understand what they need to do to be able to meet certain criteria. This last one here is another type of observation rubric. And this tends to be more generic than the task specific one, right? So as we're looking here, we're looking at what students are able to do. So we want them to be able to partition regions into equal squares. And then this is what it means to go above and beyond. This is what it means to be on target. And this means that they're not yet there. I like this because all of the specific student information is on the right-hand side. So I can see every single student really clearly that's on target, above and beyond, or not quite there yet. And so it can be really useful for planning out lessons and units. And it also helps figure out any sort of follow-up instruction that needs to happen. And we need to know too here, what are we going to do for these kids that are above and beyond? And making sure that we're continuing to push students forward with their understanding and skills.
For assessments, there are two general types of assessments, formative and summative. So the assessments allow both teachers and students to monitor their own learning, and they can be approached in a variety of ways. And formative can be as simple as you glance around the classroom, you see a lot of puzzled looks on the face. So you know you need to step back and rethink how you presented something. Or in the activity you choose to have students explore, maybe they need a little bit more scaffolding to get them there. Formative assessments also can just be giving them a question and then seeing how they answer and listening to how they discuss things. It can be going around while they're exploring something, and you're listening into their conversation, and you may be asking them some guiding questions. And the summative is, did they learn what we wanted them to learn? So that can be your performance task, your typical classroom assessment that you give. So that lets us know, have they met the end goal or not? And if not, what do we need to do to help support them in getting there? Here's an example of a formative assessment. This is from grade 3. Cheryl Rose Toby has put together a series of books that have these types of formative assessments aligned with the standards. There are also sites that we'll give later on that can give you some links to places to go, or it can be just a question from your textbook. So in looking at this, we want to know, are the students referring to the size of the interval on the number line, or are they simply counting the tick marks? And can they understand that between 0 and 1 is being partitioned into fifths? So if they're looking at tenths, that a tenth is half of a fifth. Summative assessment example, this is from Engage New York. The first question on their 3-question assessment refers to standard for numbers in base 10-1. And we can see where the students fall. Have they met it, or have they not met the criteria? So steps 3 and 4 here would be they've met it. Steps 1 and 2, let me know, are they still at a really entry level and need a lot more support, or are they almost there and they just need a little bit of support? This is a chart that I found that I really like, because depending on what we're looking for will help determine what type of assessment or how we want to. Sometimes a simple multiple choice question that's well constructed can let us know, does the student have it, or do they have one of the common misunderstandings? So this chart can be useful in helping us decide what type of assessment is best for what I want to find out from my students. And we have a little video of Jay McTighe, who many of us are familiar with, talking about why performance tasks are a good way to assess our students and their learning.
You booked a sunny Verbo ski chalet with endless views of snow-covered peaks.
Okay, here we go.
How do we create rich, authentic tasks that give us evidence of student understanding and ability to apply their learning? I think that a modern education should prepare students not only to learn things, but to be able to apply or use their learning in meaningful ways. I want teaching to be like coaching and athletics. In athletics, the players know that there's a game, and that's what they're working to get better at. So just as the game provides a reason for practice and authentic performance as our goal, I hope that students see that school is directed toward authentic, worthy performances, and that teachers function as coaches to help kids get better so they can play the game. So I want students to understand the goals that we're working toward, and hopefully to see that those goals are worthwhile and are worth working to achieve. We should be teaching for understanding and transfer.
Right. Okay, so our next section here is.
Okay, welcome everybody.
Wow.
I always love doing these webinars because I get to see and
Oh, I
welcome
was
people
like,
from
what's
all over the
happening?
world. And I think you're
Hold
in for
on,
a
sorry.
particular treat today.
Mhm.
We've got Jane
We're gonna
McTighe
go
joining
here.
us.
We're having another person. Oh, sorry, I was totally distracted by that. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about aligning standards with competencies next. And so I just wanted to start here. We wanted to talk about the 10 principles of competency-based learning. So the first one is that all learning expectations are clearly and consistently communicated to students and families. I think that the family portion of this is also really helpful, and just really making sure students as well, because a lot of times we have this information as teachers in our brains, but our students and our families aren't completely in the loop with what our thinking is sometimes. Also, the student achievement is evaluated against common learning standards and performance expectations. So everybody is being evaluated in the same way. And also, any of the assessments that we are looking at are standards-based. That's a really big part of looking at competency-based learning. Is we find that as teachers work through their standards, they unpack their standards, and then a lot of times they create these sort of learning goals or learning targets. And then after that, maybe it gets put into another application. And so there are times when people start creating competencies that they're forgetting to look back and making sure that everything is really clearly aligned to standards. So any type of competency-based learning that we're talking about is directly related to standards. So these types of assessments can be formative, right? And they're measuring the learning progress in instructional processes. So sometimes we're looking at these types of assessments, and we look at them as sort of a summative type of assessment, right? We've gone through a whole unit, and now we're looking at, do they meet this criteria or not? But what we're looking at when we're looking at competency-based learning is, okay, if we're looking at this and they didn't meet that competency, we need to give them other opportunities to meet that competency, right? Until they're ready and everything is there, and they're ready to move on from that. So we need to give them opportunities until they're ready to move on. So they can obviously be those summative assessments, right? We're making sure that before they move on, we need to make sure that they've got all of these things. They also are looking at the academic and progress and achievement, and the way that they're monitored and reported that separately from work habits and character traits, right? So we want to make sure that the achievement that we're looking at is on those particular specific standards, and whether they've met that standard or not. The academic grades communicate learning progress and achievement, right? And then students are given multiple opportunities. That's what I was talking about as the formative and becoming in the summative assessment, right? They need to be able to work through things and be able to give additional chances to meet expected standards. And making sure that we're able to allow students to show their learning and their understanding in different ways. And then when you're doing everything like this and creating these competency-based assessments, you're giving students the opportunity to make important decisions about their learning. How are they going to show their learning? How are you telling me what you know and making sure that you understand these skills? When you give students opportunity to make those decisions, they become more invested in their learning. So you want to make sure that you're allowing them that freedom to show you how they know.
We've come back to the example of the competency along with the standards related to that competencies and then the skills and understandings aligned to that. With this, in the past in New Hampshire math, model competencies were very broad. So we went through with the math competencies and made them more grade level aligned. So people had that model to see, and then to see how we can break it down into what are the different skills related to. So as we can see in numbers in base 10, A2, students are expected to read, write, and compare two multi-digit numbers. So in your class, you can use that. So to expand it, you may have the student who really has it down. Can you show me four comparing 4-digit or reading and writing 4 digits? Whereas the student who may be struggling and challenged by it a little bit more, you may stick with 2 or 3-digit numbers to begin with. And we can also see maybe they have reading and writing down and they're just having difficulty with comparing. So I don't need to reteach the whole standard. I just need to scaffold in the support for that one part of it. An important part of competencies and the standards is the depth of knowledge, but it's important to know that the depth of knowledge levels are not about greater difficulty and things just getting harder. It's about the cognitive rigor that's involved in it. So we want to see flexible thinking, seeing multiple possibilities, approaches, and possible perspectives. And that all ties into procedural fluency in mathematics too. Is a student just mimicking a procedure, or do they have flexible thinking and can see multiple possibilities depending on the context? And it's also uncovering multiple perspectives or approaches to a problem, which means understanding the concepts deeply and applying them broadly. So the tasks we learn as a beginner, such as skiing, decoding words and reading, using mathematical formulas, are hard to do at first. But the more we practice them and make them a part of our everyday routines, they become easier and more automatic. But that doesn't change. Just because we internalized it doesn't mean the DOK level changed. So the more complex task in DOK 3 or 4 requires students to apply those internalized skills and concepts in new and more complex tasks. This is similar to being on an athletic team or playing a musical instrument. You have different skills you have to learn and practice in the beginning, and then you integrate them into more complex pieces and games. The depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy. So it's not like Bloom's taxonomy, which is a hierarchy. Rather, we need all the different levels. We need those lower DOK levels to prepare the students. They need to develop those skills and real basic understandings and procedures before they can start applying them into more complex or non-routine problems. It is a tool that can help strategically scaffold learning so students can move from the basic to a deeper understanding. And the number of steps doesn't make a problem more complex. So it's the non-routine nature of how one step might lead to decisions being made about other steps. So if we take a look, this is from a 4th grade fraction standard. Take a look and see if you can decide which is the DOK1, which is the DOK2, and which is the DOK3. So I'll give you a few seconds just to think about that. So hopefully everybody realized that B is the DOK1. I'm just comparing two fractions given to me and being able to use the correct symbol to communicate which one is greater, less than, or equal to. And just in terms of development, it's important to give students chances to experience the using of all those symbols, and that students typically tend to have a harder time with less than using more than. And then as we go on, hopefully we can see that C is the DOK2. I've gotten the ability to compare fractions down. Now I have to create the fractions and put in a situation. And then A is our DOK3. Not only do I have to choose the digits to put in, I want to create something that's as creative fractions that is as close to 1 as possible. So the cognitive rigor goes up. Robert Kaplinski has created these nice matrices so you can see what different standards are and questions that may go with them at DOK 1, 2, and 3. A DOK 4 would be more like an extended task rather than just a single problem. And these will all be in the handouts that you receive tomorrow. Aligning standards with competencies. We want to make sure that how we're assessing students, what the competency is, that we have the standards, because that's going to help create the framework of our lessons as we plan. We can also use the templates to help in planning student learning for meeting a competency or assessment for a set of standards. So here's just a different template to help us in our planning. And then proficiency versus mastery. A competency scale is not a pass-fail type of grading. It's have they met the competency or have they not? And so is it a beginning learner or a developing learner? It just depends on when I go back to relook at how I can support that student, what is it I have to scaffold in? We want all our students to become proficient, and then there are those that will take it and run it and then develop a higher degree of proficiency or mastery.
Okay, so now we're looking at assessing competencies with performance tasks. I did want to pause right here. I did see a question in the chat that was saying that they were hoping that we were going to go and get into strategies for finding time for kids to have multiple opportunities to revisit and then reassess, because it's a real struggle. That is not actually something we're going to be going into in much detail here in this particular webinar. This is more making sure that folks understand what competencies are, that they're looking at the standards, and we're going to get into what it is for looking at performance tasks.
Right. But, Heather, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Feel free, though, to email me and reach out to me, and that is something that I can meet with you with and work on and help you develop that and finding resources for.
Excellent. Yeah, and I was just to kind of add on to that, when we're looking at using competencies, it is a different sort of way to go about teaching. So a lot of times you're trying to incorporate them into sort of your units of teaching, and it is just a little bit different way of looking at things and allowing students that flexibility to be able to move through them. So Annie, like she said, can talk to you a little bit in further detail about that to see if we can help you sort of incorporate it into what you're doing currently. So moving on to assessing competencies with performance tasks. This graphic we just created to make sure that you understand with competency-based education in general, all that teaching and learning and all of your curriculum and instruction and all those formative assessments are a large part of your time and your energy that is spent to be able to get students to where they need to be. And that what we're talking about now is that sort of summative assessment or performance tasks, or any way that you're going to assess those. We're looking at performance tasks today. And then that is that sort of 10% of the time. So performance tasks are super important so that we can measure student achievement and student success, but a lot of your time is going to be spent, just like with anything else, on that teaching and understanding and making sure that you're formatively assessing things as you go to make sure students are ready for those performance tasks. So what are they, right? So performance tasks tend to be a summative assessment, right? They are a summative assessment of a competency, right? Or mastery-based assessment model. So performance tasks are also, they can be called performance assessments or performance-based assessments. And what they're doing is they're having students demonstrate and apply their knowledge and higher order thinking in relation to what is most often an authentic or real world problem or task, right? So again, we're talking about the application of skills, right? This is not just rote learning. I'm applying what I know to complex tasks and problems. And here we're talking about them a little bit more as a summative assessment, but they can also be embedded throughout a unit. Or they can be a little bit shorter and taking place at the end of a lesson, series, or unit. So they don't necessarily have to be these big problems and assessments that take oodles and oodles of time. What they are doing, though, every time is providing feedback to the learner. Right? We need to make sure that students have this feedback so that they know what they need to be able to do to better their understanding and deepen their skills. Characteristics of a good performance task, again, calling for application and not just recall. They tend to be open-ended and don't necessarily have a single correct answer, although they could. They are really looking at applying those skills into a novel or authentic context. So it's not necessarily something where, you've worked on it for a certain set of days within a specific context. Now we're giving it and applying it to a new or novel situation. This next one is talking about looking at that transfer of knowledge. And sometimes it's not a super clean, easy situation, right? It requires a lot of transfer and a lot of thought and problem solving. And so we need to make sure that students are using that thoughtful application of knowledge and skills rather than having it just be following a script or a formulaic type of assessment. So these assessments are also multifaceted. A lot of times they include multiple steps. Again, with what Annie said, multiple steps don't, necessarily indicate a deeper depth of knowledge, but traditionally performance tasks have multiple steps, and they can be used, and most often are used to assess more than one set of standards or outcomes. What we really like too is to be able to create performance tasks that integrate more than one subject. Maybe you're looking at some ELA skills along with math skills. And you're able to establish a rubric that will assess all of that particular established criteria and all of those different skills. So a good performance task can occur over time and does not need to be done in one sitting. So sometimes they are done over multiple days. 100% they are aligned to standards. And the results is something that's tangible that you can really take a look at and decipher whether those skills are had. And sometimes it's not just, a poster that somebody does, but maybe it's something that you can observe, whether it be students are creating a video or students are doing some sort of presentation to show their skills. A lot of times this part is missing, but I like that we're reminding that it is encouraging self-evaluation and revision. So students have a rubric, students have an understanding of what needs to be done, and they also have an understanding of how they can improve. And then that revealing those degrees of proficiency, right? So that rubric or the established criteria is very well known by the students. And like Annie was saying in the beginning, like the end game is in mind when we create these rubrics. So students can always see where they are on the spectrum of that rubric, where they fall in with those skills. And a lot of times it helps to be able to work with others. When I have done different performance tasks in the past, you may be working with a partner, or you may be having a group evaluate whether you are meeting that established set of criteria as well. So it's really making sure that students are working together and with you to deepen their skills and understanding.
Here is just an example of a grade 4 performance task. This one is from Inside Mathematics. Inside Mathematics has some really nice tasks, but they don't really, their rubrics tend to be point-based rather than by quality of the criteria or how met. But they also, the nice thing is they do show and provide discussion on student work, so you can get an idea of how different students may respond and what it looks like. The site also offers other resources and support for teachers. Illustrative Math is another site that provides tasks that are aligned with standards. They also provide other resources and tasks, and their tasks go from kindergarten through high school. No rubric is provided, however, they do provide a commentary. So some examples of places to find performance tasks, balanced assessments. This was developed through a National Science Foundation grant with the Harvard School of Education. You can see all the tasks in the rubrics. Most of the K-8 ones are no longer available for download. They've put them out in print. Illustrative Math, Inside Mathematics, the PACE tasks, so schools that have been working with PACE tasks, they are being organized and will be put on the New Hampshire DOE Canvas site so that people will have access to them. The Virginia Department of Education also has tasks with rubrics and anchor papers. However, Virginia uses what they call student learning objectives, but if you go through, you can see where they align to the Common Core standards that we use. So in planning and using assessments, we want to ensure that the assessments are appropriate for a specific purpose. We want to make sure they're designed and aligned to that purpose. We want to take the data from that and see how the students are meeting it. Is there anything we need to go back and scaffold in for them? Are they moving ahead? So we want to use that data appropriate to support the student learning, and professional learning communities or PLCs can be wonderful places to support collaboration in developing assessments, analyzing the data, and planning the next steps. And Heather and Demonstrated Success have been doing a lot of work with PLCs in schools, so feel free to reach out to them. The effects of planning and using assessments. We want to use effective classroom assessment strategies to inform our teaching and our learning practices. We want to ensure that we're using the right evidence for the right purpose. Different assessments give us different information. We want to improve skills in critiquing and revising existing assessments when necessary. Having a deeper knowledge of our current student understandings, making more informed instructional decisions to support their learning, and making more efficient and effective use of the information on district and state level assessments. Those will not necessarily drive that individual student assessment, but you can get a broad view of what the curriculum is, where the curriculum has its strengths, where it may not have strengths, but needs to be relooked at. So with the but in all of it, the educational outcome of improving student learning is our goal. Universal design for learning. It's an approach to pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment. It is grounded in learning sciences and neuroscience. And the main focus of UDLs is it changes the focus of changing our students to meet the classroom demands, to taking a look at changing our curriculum to meet the complexity and the variability of the students right in front of us at that point in time. And it's also asked us to design learning experiences across the differences rather than to the general middle. So some examples, CAST works with the New Hampshire DOE and has a set of flexible scaffolds and supports. This is an educational practices that works in unison with differentiated instruction, and it also works on the backward design. What is the end result? And then how can we plan the learning opportunities for our students to meet that? And here's just another example of lesson planning with UDL. So what are the learning goals and objectives? How am I going to assess that that learning has occurred? And then how will I get my students there? It's also recognizing the students as individuals and that they're intentional, flexible options for the students in front of us at that point in time. And this is just kind of a slide that gives you the cycle. We have the formative assessment to assess prior knowledge. We want to meet the students where they're at. And then we plan our learning goals and everything to meet that final objective that we had decided in our planning our lesson cycle 2.
Okay. So at this point, we were going to do the wrap up and any sort of question and answer. I know we asked you to ask questions sort of throughout, but know that this is wrapping up our presentation. So if for some reason we didn't get to your question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. We are in a webinar mode, so it's really hard for you folks to raise your hands and for us to unmute you. So if you could please put your questions in the Q&A, it will be a lot easier for us to go through and make sure we're answering your questions. There were a couple of questions that we had with registration, so we just wanted to make sure to go through these as well. So the first one was, how do you see differences in utilizing performance tasks as student assessments within remediation at this level? So Annie and I were talking about this a little bit before this session. And I don't know if Annie, if you want to answer this question or if you would like me to go ahead and answer it.
My thing is, I think the focus for this is with the formative assessments and then seeing what you need to build and scaffold in for the student.
Right. We also talked about when we're looking at competencies right now, with the way that our system works, we're sort of looking at grade level competencies, right? Like if we could take a snow globe and we could mix up everything that we know about education and grade levels, and we were looking at competency-based education, we would probably not be looking at specific grade levels, but different degrees of understanding skills that don't necessarily correlate with a specific grade. But whenever we're looking at competencies, what we want to make sure of is if we are looking at fourth grade, that we are continuing to keep the fourth grade standards in mind when we are creating the competency and remediating, right? So if we're looking at something that has to do with comparing multi-digit numbers in fourth grade, and we know that our students can't necessarily compare numbers up to 10,000 in fourth grade, what numbers can they compare? Are they able to compare two-digit numbers, or are they able to compare 2 3-digit numbers? And being able to scaffold that. And what Annie's saying with the formative assessments is if you're scaffolding and they've gotten it to a certain point, then we continue to keep that competency based on the end game of where we would like to see them at a specific grade level. So the next question we had were you're looking for good examples of math diagnostic assessments. So we put this particular link in here for the National Center for Intensive Intervention. And you can go right to those academic tools. If you want to talk a little bit about that, Annie.
No, I think a lot of it is, part of it depends on, what are your district needs? What are your school needs? What are your classroom needs? But this is a good place to go, as they've done some evaluations of some of the common screeners and diagnostic assessments, both in math and reading. And for math, they're looking at classification accuracy, the technical standards, and usability features. So you can look at their reports and see what may be available and how they as an organization have rated them.
Right. And then the last one is somebody was interested in assessment practices to reinforce math fact fluency. Anything that has to do with number talks or the notice and wonder or two routines. And, you can Google it. There's lots of different information out there on number talks and the notice and wonder. If you're looking at specifically math thinking, the which one does not belong is also another one. But these were a couple of the routines that we thought of for fact fluency.
Right. And that's another thing, feel free to reach out to me and I can work with you on what is it you're specifically interested in and what are some possible resources or PD that I can just come in and give to you.
Great. So this last couple of slides here, we have the supporting learning through competency webinars for grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. If you were part of the K-2 one, it is the same sort of shell that we have for this webinar, but it's looking more at standards and examples at those particular grade levels. The high school one will end up being a little bit different because high school is just sort of a different entity. So we're looking at a little bit different format for that one, but for the most part, the same type of information. We're always looking for feedback. So please, when you get off this webinar, a survey will pop up. I think it's 4 questions. We really want to know what you find useful and what you might like to know a little bit more about. That's one of the reasons why we created this set of webinars in general about competency-based assessments and performance tasks is because we knew that there was a need. So please continue to let us know what you might want to learn about in the future and what was helpful about this webinar or what you might need more of. This is our information here. Again, I'm Heather Jenkins, and then Annie Wallace is here from the state. Tammy was here. She's actually, for Demonstrated Success, our ELA person. So we thank her for being on today to be our facilitator. And we'll just stay on for another few seconds here to see if there's any additional questions that you might have. But other than that, thanks again so much for taking time out of your day today. We know it's valuable. You will be getting an email with your certificate and all the link to any of the documents and handouts, including these slides with the links in them and everything. So thanks so much.